So, how do we define health and disease? As we will see over the course of this video, this can be a pretty difficult task. Society still has not agreed on a single definition of health. Despite this, it's important to consider the definitions that have been proposed over the years, because in order to improve health, we need to figure out exactly what we're trying to improve. The Oxford English Dictionary states that health is the state of being free from illness or injury. Over the years, academics have found it easy to criticize this type of simplistic definition because it implies primarily that health is a physical state, but overlooks or ignores other dimensions of health such as mental and social well-being. So perhaps we should look towards the definition of health proposed by the World Health Organization in 1948, which still persists as their definition to this day. The World Health Organization states that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So here, health is much more than just the absence of disease. It is a state in which an individual is physically, psychologically, and socially well. If we think more deeply about these three proposed dimensions of health, we can develop definitions for each one. In this case, physical health could be the absence of biomedical illness or injury. Mental health could be a sense of psychological well-being, including an absence of mental illness such as anxiety, depression, psychosis, and dementia. Social health is slightly more difficult to define, but might be thought of as people's capacity to fulfill their potential and obligations, the ability to manage their life with some degree of independence, and the ability to participate in normative social activities, including work. So, in a broad sense, this definition provides a thorough and all-encompassing overview of what we as a society commonly view as health. Despite this, however, the World Health Organization definition has been criticized over the past 60 years. Most criticisms of the WHO definition concern the absoluteness of the word complete in relation to well-being. The first problem is that it unintentionally might contribute to the medicalization of society. The requirement for complete health would leave most of us unhealthy most of the time. For example, I am currently a little bit nervous about doing this voiceover for this video, so I would technically be considered unhealthy. This conceptualization therefore supports the tendencies of the medical technology and drug industries in association with professional organizations to constantly redefine diseases so that more and more people are classified as needing healthcare interventions, thereby encouraging profit-seeking within health industries. Another problem is that since 1948, the demography of populations and the nature of diseases have changed considerably. In 1948, acute diseases presented the main burden of illnesses, and chronic diseases led to an early death usually. But disease patterns have changed because of public health infrastructures such as improved nutrition, hygiene, and sanitation, and much more powerful healthcare interventions. As a result, the number of people living with chronic diseases is increasing worldwide. Aging with chronic diseases has become the norm, and chronic diseases account for most of the expenditures of the healthcare system. Some experts therefore argue that the World Health Organization definition becomes counterproductive as it declares people with chronic diseases and disabilities as definitively ill. It minimizes the role of human capacity to cope autonomously with life's ever-changing physical, emotional, and social challenges and to function with fulfillment and feelings of well-being despite having chronic diseases or disabilities. A final problem is the operationalization of the definition. The World Health Organization has developed several systems to classify diseases and describe aspects of health, disability, functioning, and quality of life. Yet because of the reference to a complete state of well-being, the definition of health remains impracticable because complete is neither operational nor measurable. So, if we want to redefine health, how do we go about doing this? Well, it's an ambitious and complex goal. Many aspects need to be considered, and many stakeholders need to be consulted. Also, many cultures need to be reflected, and it must take into account future scientific and technological advances. The Ottawa Charter for Health Promotion affirmed social, economic, and environmental aspects of health in 1986. This important Canadian document states that in order to be healthy, an individual or a group must be able to identify and realize aspirations to satisfy needs and change or cope with the environment. In this way, health is seen as a resource or an asset that helps us lead our everyday lives. Health is seen as a positive concept that emphasizes social and personal resources as well as physical capacities. An article published by Machteld Huber in 2011 proposed the definition of health as the ability to adapt and self-manage. This definition was an attempt to move towards a more dynamic one based on the resilience or capacity to cope and maintain or restore one's integrity, equilibrium, and sense of well-being. In this case, health is viewed as a resource for everyday life, not the objective of living. It's a concept emphasizing social and personal resources as well as physical capacities. Thus, health refers to the ability to maintain homeostasis and recover from insults. Mental, intellectual, emotional, and social health refer to a person's ability to handle stress, to acquire skills, maintain relationships, all of which form resources for resiliency and independent living. Despite all of this, however, there is still no universally accepted definition of health, and I argue that this is probably okay. The WHO definition is the one that is used most commonly, but I have presented a few counter-arguments and alternatives. Different people, professions, and organizations have different definitions and conceptualizations of health. This is important to embrace, particularly in cross-sectional settings. For example, Indigenous communities in Canada might emphasize different conceptualizations of health, which include spiritual or cultural health as an integral component. Given the colonial nature and systematic and structural trauma faced by Indigenous populations in Canada, these definitions may also include reconciliation, self-determination, and sovereignty. A colleague of mine who has spent time researching conceptualizations of health among Inuit in northern Labrador found that Inuit felt that actively using traditional knowledge and connecting with their heritage was an important pathway for feeling good about themselves and overall health and well-being. Considering this, one Indigenous definition of health, or Inuit definition of health in this case, might be a feeling of physical, cultural, emotional, spiritual, and cultural well-being rooted in self-determination and strong connections with others, the surrounding environment, and one's tradition and ancestry. This is simply an example meant to show you that Indigenous peoples in Canada may choose to pursue a different definition of health than those proposed previously, and it's likely that many different First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities would choose to pursue slightly different conceptualizations of health. So, in conclusion, as you proceed in your Bachelor's of Arts in Health and Community Services, it's important to realize that we don't actually need just one definition of health, and to allow people to pursue their own definition depending on their values, their culture, their language, their perceptions, and their beliefs. In this way, we might consider health a social or cultural construct, an idea we'll be returning to over the course of the semester.